Faith is of no avail in absence of strength. Faith and strength both are essential to accomplish any great work. This is also a PYQ and a quote by Sardar Patel. This quote essentially says that faith and strength both complements each other. If you have extraordinary amount of strength but not faith in yourself, you are not going to achieve anything, and just faith without hard work is also not going to result in anything. So faith and strength has to complement, and this has been showed by the life of Patel itself, because Patel ji has worked hard and believed in a unity or unified India, so he has unified all the princely states and built a strong bureaucracy. Now with spirit of Sardar Patel ji in our mind, let us get into today's topics. These are the topics we are going to discuss today, right. We will start with GDP growth. GDP, the macroeconomic indices of Indian economy, external sector, and all these things are some of the important areas for UPSC, and you can expect at least one question almost coming in every year prelims. So the state of Indian economy from the economic survey that is released every year is an extremely important chapter. This will analyze the trends of GDP and other macroeconomics indices of India, and the students has to keep in mind that you have to not just by heart the data of the current, but you also understand the trends of what is happening in the past 5 years, 6 years, past decade, and what are the factors driving that trends. With that in mind, now let us start this. The main highlight is that the GDP growth rate for the current fiscal, that is for the current quarter of fiscal year 26, Q2 quarter, that is July to September quarter, has unexpectedly surprised everyone by showcasing a strong 8.2%. Right. This was a surprise for economists, for policymakers, and for everyone else, right. It showed a 8.2% growth, which is the highest in last 6 quarters. Now the real GDP, this is real GDP growth, not a nominal GDP growth, and the gross value added has also increased to 8.1% from 7.6% in the previous quarter. Right. Previously it was 7.6, now it has increased to 8.1%. Now before we get into why this is happening, what are the reasons for this trend, or is everything positive only, or are there any concerns, I just want to give you the data points for you. The strong growth that we are observing this quarter is on the basis of manufacturing sector, on the basis of financial and real estate sector, on the basis of public administration and defense sector, whereas the growth of agriculture has moderated, right. And the only sector where we have seen a negative growth is mining and quarrying sector, and given that this quarter majorly falls during monsoon season, this is to be expected. But the extraordinary performance of manufacturing, services sector, especially services sector, has been growing at near double digit growth for the last 2 quarters, and this is one of the reasons for driving this numbers up. Now economists have expected that the GDP growth rate will moderate to 7.3 to 7.8% compared to previous quarter, but however we have achieved 8.2%, right. Now with this back to back bumper quarters, that is the Q1 and Q2 of this financial year achieving more than expected growth, both RBI as well as economic advisor has revised their growth forecast and said that Indian economy will grow above 7% in this current financial year, right. Previously they were saying somewhere between 6.3 to 6.8%, but back to back bumper years of bumper quarters of growth, now they are saying it will be somewhere around 7%, right. Now like we discussed, what are the factors? Industry, public sector, defenses, services, etc. are the main factors, and most importantly the public capex investment by the government. The capex investment by the government is the chief driver for gross fixed capital formation, right. And also there are trends of uptick in private credit as well as investor sentiments, but as of now what is happening with the private credit is uncertain, but as of now the public spending is what driving the investor sentiment in the economy. So apart from this, we also have another positive in terms of increase in private household consumption, right. The increase in private household consumption is on the backdrop of lower GST rates, less inflation, and also lower GST rates, less inflation, which has increased the discretionary spending. The combination of lower GST and inflation has increased the discretionary spending, which has again increased the private consumption in the economy also. Now these are all the positive aspects. Now what are the areas of concern? See, the data that we have discussed so far is a real GDP data. Now when we compare this data with the nominal GDP data, that is adding inflation into the effect, what is happening is that we are at this point of time 8.7% in this quarter, which is less than what it is expected, that is 8.8%. So we are already 1 point less in this quarter compared to the same last year. So the nominal GDP data is still slow. This shows there is a tepid activity in the economy. That means the underlying economic activity, either in terms of investor sentiments or in terms of public consumption, year on year is less than what it was last year back when we compare it with the nominal GDP. And also the another factor of concern is that the government has estimated to have a 12.5% increase in tax revenues compared to last year, but so far what happened is that gross tax revenues were just up by 4% in the first 7 months. So in order to achieve this 12.5% of gross tax revenue, the government has to collect taxes somewhere around 22.5%, right. So this is another area of concern. The gross tax collection is for the first 7 months is just up by 4%, whereas the government plans to achieve a 12.5% year on year increase in gross tax collection, and in order to achieve that in the next 5 months we need to collect almost 22.5% of taxes. Now another major point of clash of the critics is that the deflator data, for example, the government is showing the inflation is only 0.5% in the economy. So the criticism is that the higher than expected growth rate is also because of a very low deflator data also, deflator percentage also. So now these are some of the issues with this thing. Now before we go into this, we will have a small conceptual discussion about GVA and GDP. We all know GDP measures the total value of goods and services in the economy, that is the final output of all the value of goods and services in the economy, that is GDP, whereas GVA gives a sectoral picture of each and every sector. The advantage of GVA over GDP is that GVA will not include intermediary goods. So this will take down the problem of double counting, right. Since it is not including any intermediary goods and taking out the problem of double counting, it will give a realistic picture of particular sector or industry of an economy and how it is performing. So in terms of policymakers, for the investors, and also for a better cross comparison of different countries, GVA is a better indicator. Now what are the cons of GVA? The first is that GVA gives us a sectoral data, but there is no global definition of sectors, and what constitute primary sector here might be different. What are the industries constituting primary sector in India might be different from some other country. So it will not be an accurate comparison between cross country comparison. The next thing is that GVA calculations are based on valuation of output, in the sense that it gives the total value of output of a sector, Now this can be extremely subjective, because depending upon the situations and the other factors, valuation can differ, right. And also, though GVA does not include any intermediary goods, but there is still a problem of double counting. For example, let us take electricity. Electricity is used as an input in lot of industries. It is not an intermediary good, it is an input. So input is calculated in the GVA. So the same electricity which is used for one industry is also used by other. So there will be a problem of double counting here. The next thing is that GVA depends upon the prices of raw materials. So the changes in prices of raw materials will increase or decrease the output value by a sector, right. These are some of the cons of GVA. The next topic, RBI norms for digital banking channels, right. So Indian economy is getting drastically digitalized at a very faster rate with the advent of UPI, fintech and IMPS apps, mobile banking apps, etc. Now there is a increased cyber fraud, there is an increased phishing scams, digital arrest scams, etc. In light of this, RBI has been issuing regular guidelines to control the cyber or digital aspect of financial sector, and one of the efforts in this regard is the norms for digital banking. Now what are the major guidelines that RBI has given, right. The first thing is that RBI has said that there should be a mandatory consumer consent. There should be a mandatory consumer consent, in the sense that without asking or without the consumer duly recording his consent, digital banking should not be enabled. Point number 1. Point number 2 is that core banking services like provision of debit card, etc. should not be withheld just because the consumer has not opted in for the digital banking, in the sense that core banking services should be dissociated from digital banking, and digital banking should only be enabled to consumers with their express consent. So this is the first thing. So consumer cannot be forced to adopt anything, right. However, banks can still take phone numbers and other important details of the consumer in line with KYC norms in order to enable or in order to send their emails or SMSs regarding transaction alerts or transaction limits, etc. So this banks can still do, but other digital banking services like internet banking, etc. should be expressly written and expressly consent should be given by the consumer, right. If the consumer does not give any consent, it does not mean that banks can withhold core services like provision of debit card, etc. This is the first thing. And the second thing RBI said is that we should have a network independent access, right. Third part, okay, we should have a network independent access, in the sense that the alerts regarding the transaction, the alerts regarding the transaction volume and intensity should be given or should be sent to all the consumers regardless of their network, right. It should be sent to all the consumers regardless of their network. Then there are again instructions or guidelines regarding risk mitigation, right. Banks must adopt a comprehensive mitigation strategies including per day, per week, per month velocity checks and number and frequency of transactions, fraud detection tools, monitoring unusual behavior, etc. For example, if you are using credit card, what happens is that if you make any foreign transaction or anything, suddenly you will get a call from the bank asking to refute or refuse the charge or accept the charge, so validate the charge. So this kind of unusual monitoring of behavior, and also limiting the daily transactions, right, monitoring the daily transactions, frequency of the transactions, everything should be closely monitored in order to ensure any unusual activity is found in the beginning itself and the harm can be curtailed. The next thing is that third party product restrictions. Right. What does the third party product restriction say? It means that the third party or any subsidiaries of the bank should their products, the third parties or the subsidiaries of the banks and their products should not be displayed in the on the digital banking page of the bank. Right. The digital banking page of the bank should not display any third parties or the subsidiaries of the bank unless and until expressly approved by the RBI. So, this is to ensure that there are no associated links or there are no any other leading away from this to other or create unnecessary clicking of links and increase the chances of fraud. Right. So, these are some of the norms that RBI has put in place. Now, apart from this, in recent times RBI has also released 3 major guidelines. One is guidelines for digital payment and security controls in 2021. So, guidelines for digital payment and security control basically has some important provisions. One is authentication, having a multi-factor authentication, mandatory risk-based transaction controls like velocity checks, anomaly detection, real-time fraud monitoring, and secure app and API control. This mostly involves having a very good encryption models and having periodic vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. So, these are under guidelines for digital banking and security controls. Next is cyber security controls or cyber security framework for banks. This is released in 2016 and the RBI keeps on updating this regularly, right. All banks should maintain a 24/7 security operations center, real time threat monitoring and reporting, right, within 2 to 6 hours, and regulatory focus on data protection. That means restricting the access of the consumers and how many people can access this and who can access this and in what way they can access this, etc. Right. And the third guideline is guidelines on digital lending. Right, this is released in 2022-2023. It also says that there should be no direct flow of funds to lending gap, in the sense that there is a fintech company which procures the consumer and this fintech company is backed by an NBFC or bank and you are the borrower. So, it should be happening from here to here, not from here to here. So, directly it should be the loan dispersal repayment must occur only between bank accounts of lender and the borrower, not through pass through. Next thing is mandatory disclosure of consumer consent, in the sense that this is to prevent unnecessary or hidden charges. So, what they do is that before signing up a loan, all the fintech applications should give the consumer something called as key fact statement to read. Only once the consumer read this key fact statements and accept it, then the loan can be dispersed. Next thing is restriction on first loss default guarantee. Now, another important terminology here is first loss deposit guarantee. So, what is this? For example, like we discussed, it is a fintech. Fintech is backed by an NBFC and the role of fintech is to procure the consumers and the role of NBFC is to provide the money. Now, in case the defaulter, in case the borrower defaults, in case the person who has taken the money defaults, then in order to ensure that entire burden does not fall on NBFCs, the fintech will also pledge some 10% or 5% of the total amount that is spending. Now, the problem is RBI wants to regulate this, in the sense that RBI is notoriously very cautious about unnecessarily defaulting happening in the economy, and fintech companies, in order to attract more consumers, they might reduce their assessment norms. So, in order to prevent that, so there is a regulation on how much percentage of first loss default guarantee the fintech apps can take. So, these are some of the guidelines RBI keeps on releasing in order to ensure that the cyber financial space is secure in the country. Now, let us get on to another topic, IMF grading, right. This is another topic, and the topic is that ahead of MOSPI revision, IMF retains C grade for India's data series. Now, what is this C grade, why it is retaining C grade, what is happening here, let us get into this. Now, IMF generally provides different kind of grading for the statistical data that is released by the country, right. As of now, IMF maintains B grade for overall Indian financial accounts, in the sense that the government finances, the price statistics, etc., that India generally releases. The overall rating of Indian financial statistics, IMF has given B grade. But for the national accounts, that is for the GDP data, IMF has given C grade. So, for official statistics, we are at B grade. For the GDP data, etc., we are at C grade. This grading is given in IMF 2025 staff report. So, IMF releases this every year, called as staff report, and in this staff report it will give the gradings for the country's statistical indices. Now, what are the different kind of gradings the IMF gives? IMF generally gives 4 kind of gradings. The first is A, that is data is high quality, it is timely and comprehensive. Second is the data is broadly adequate for surveillance, in the sense that by using the data you can understand what is happening in the economy. Third is data has significant shortcomings, in the sense that data is there, but data has some significant shortcomings which will prevent or prohibit from completely understanding the macroeconomic scenario. And D is serious deficiencies. Now, in terms of normal national statistics, in terms of official statistics, we are at B grade, that means adequate for surveillance. In terms of national accounts, that is GDP, etc., we are at C, that means there are some severe shortcomings in the data. Right. Now, before we getting into this, let us see the past, in the sense that, for example, the C data implies data is adequate but has quality or coverage gaps that weaken the economic analysis. Now, before 2023, 2024 also we got C grade, but before that in 2023 it has not given a grade and said, while data provision is broadly adequate for surveillance, upgrading and expanding statistics, particularly in real sector like employment data, prices, would help in monitoring. So, like I said, we have C data, in the sense that our data is adequate, but it is not giving a complete picture for the economy. That is what IMF also said. That is why in 2023 it has not given us any grade, and then it has given us C grade. Now, we are at the again in the C grade for the national accounts. Now, why IMF assigned C grade? The first thing is that IMF says our GDP base year of 2011 and 2012 needs to be revised and updated, and we have to bring it as close as possible, especially following COVID and lot of disruptions in the economy. This GDP base data is not giving a comprehensive understanding about the Indian economy. Next thing is that IMF also says that India is not updating its base year very frequently. So, it wants frequent upgradation of base year, and also our databases or data regarding employment, prices, etc. are inadequate, and hence they are hampering the surveillance of Indian economy, and that is the reason we have been given the C grade. Right. Now, what are the steps that we are taking in this regard? The steps we are taking in this regard is that Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation is already planning on new GDP series with the base year 2022-23, and this might officially come into play by the end of February 2026. Also, the same ministry is also in the process of updating consumer price index based inflation data based upon household consumption and expenditure survey for 23-24, right. Right now we are following household consumption data of 2011-2012. The household consumption and expenditure survey usually happens once in every 5 years. Please understand this, it can be a very important prelim statement. The statement can be the household consumer and expenditure survey has to happen or mandatorily has to happen once in every 5 years. No, it usually has to happen once in every 5 years, and we have conducted one in 2016-2017, but the government did not decide to use the data, citing severe quality issues in the survey and the data that it has produced. So we are still continuing with the 2011 and 2012 survey, and now we have conducted one more in 2023 and 2024, and we are updating the CPI based inflation data based upon this 2023 and 2024. These are the two steps the government of India is taking in order to ensure the adequate understanding about the macroeconomics of India. Now, before we go into this, let us also see what is this household consumption and expenditure survey. See, the household consumption, it is basically collect information regarding consumption and expenditure of households on various goods and services. The name itself says that. So, what is the purpose of this? The purpose of this is to assess trends in economic well-being and also update the baskets of consumer goods and their relative weightage in the CPI index, right. It is basically, it will show us a picture of how much consumption and expenditure is happening at a household level across India, rural, urban and combined, and it also says what are the types of goods and services we are utilizing, and whatever is the updation needed that we have will add, and whatever the goods and services, for example, no one is using radios or VCRs anymore, so that will be taken out, right. DVD players no one is using, that will be taken out, something like that, and the weightage of each and every category will also be accordingly adjusted. So, for all these things that is happening in the CPI, household consumption and expenditure survey data will be used, right. Let us see what is our next topic. Next topic is mutual fund portfolios. It is about as Sensex, Nifty touch records high, why mutual fund portfolios are not mirroring that rise yet. It is basically about the stock market and what is happening in the stock market. While we are having a stock market rally and there is an increase in the stock prices and gains, the same is not reflected in the mutual fund portfolios. For example, most of us are investing in stocks or SIP or something like that. So, if that is the case, you must be seen that in the last 1 year or so, the mutual funds are not gaining much, whereas stocks are gaining extraordinarily well, right. So, whatever, if you have invested some 1000 rupees some 1 year back, you must have just now achieved some sort of exactly 1000 rupees, it must have gone into losses, and now losses will be recovered and you must be just be seeing what you have invested, but no profits anymore, right. Why the mutual fund portfolios are not giving profits, whereas stocks are giving profits? One of the reason is the current rally that the stock market is seeing is a narrow one, right. The current rally is being run by large cap companies like ICICI, HDFC and Reliance, but not by small and medium cap companies, right. So, since the current rally is basically being, the market right now is basically being pushed by or borne by only large cap companies, so the gains are not spread across, right. Now, understand the logic factor here. The current stock market is being run by large cap companies, whereas mutual funds are invested in diversified portfolios, which includes large, medium and small, not just large. Since mutual funds are invested across all cap companies and stock market is only for large cap companies, there is no increase in the mutual fund returns, whereas we are seeing increase in the stock returns. Point number 1. So, what is happening with small and medium cap companies? The problem is, when the stock market was experiencing high last time some 14 months back, what happened is that too much amount of money went into this medium and small cap companies, and currently investors feel the valuation of this medium and small cap companies are not reflecting the true picture. the valuations are not reflecting the true picture. Since they believe the valuations are not reflecting the true picture, no one is trying to invest in this medium and small companies and only in the large companies. But since the mutual fund is a diversified investment, not just large company investment, we are not seeing gains in the mutual fund returns. The second factor is Indian market is out of sync with the global market, in the sense that the global market right now is strongly being driven by AI related stocks, whether it is UK or US, Japan, Europe, China, all these places the stock market is heavily focused on AI and AI related stocks, whereas Indian stock market is out of sync with this phenomena, right. That is also another problem. And the third problem, which is particularly an Indian centric problem, is this one. See, in this year we have seen a large amount of IPOs coming up, right. A record number of IPOs has been the one of the unique or standout feature of Indian stock market this year. Now what happens is that most of the IPOs of this year are offer for sale. In a sense, these are IPOs or stocks that has been put in the market by investor or promoter of that company, who is selling his part of the company so that he can exit or dilute his stake in that company. Please understand, there is an investor or promoter called as X. He owns say 10% of the company. Now he wants to sell out all this 10% of the company, or he wants to reduce this 10% to say 6% or something. So now what he will do, he will offer his stocks or his shares in form of IPO, right. And when the now what is happening is that since the IPOs are coming out, most of the retail investors and investors, retail consumers and investors are going or choosing this attractive IPOs but not investing in the mutual funds. Understand this, most of the money that is there in the market is being diverted to buy these IPOs which are nothing but offer for sale but not investing in the mutual funds. So what is the problem with this is that all this IPO money is again not going to the company, all this IPO money is basically going to the guy who is offering up these shares in the stock market. So what is happening is that there is no movement in the secondary market, there is only movement in the primary market, because money is get stuck here, and so in consumers does not have enough money to involve in the secondary market. But one good thing economists are saying is that this trend is reducing at the fag end of the year. So once this trend reduces, there will be again movement in the secondary market, which will pick up investments in the mutual fund sector and will again gain momentum for the mutual fund sector. So these are the three factors we have discussed why mutual funds are not doing well. So why I went into this discussion is that of late in the last 2 years in UPSC has been focusing more on the stock market. So it's better to have an idea or understanding about this, right. Now before we get into this, we will also discuss a small topic, that is what are the how does the future of Indian stock market looks. The current rally of Indian stock market is because of Brent crude prices being very low. So the Brent crude prices contains not only our current account deficit but also our inflation and the other factors. So the stock market performance in the future mostly depends upon the prices of Brent crude and also the US rate cut. So what happens is that when US has, see for example, there is a concept here, please understand this. This is US Fed. US Federal Reserve, let us assume, has put its interest rate at 6% or something. So now banks need money to lend, right. Banks need money to lend. So where will banks get that money? Banks will get that money from public itself. So public will give it to bank and bank will lend that money to borrowers, right. Now in return bank will pay interest to the public for lending the money, and bank will collect interest from the borrowers. So the amount of interest the bank pays will mostly determine upon the US Fed rate, and the amount of interest that the borrower pays to bank will also be depending upon the Fed rate. This will mostly be higher than the Fed rate, and this will be almost equal to the Fed rate. So, only when it is equal to Fed rate it will be attractive, right. It will be higher, the banks, the interest rate banks will charge on the borrowers will be higher because banks has to make profits. Okay. This is the scenario. Now, US is a stable economy. So, in order to attract US foreign investors into India, what emerging economies like India generally does is that keep their interest rates greater than US Fed rate. So, if US Fed rate is 6, we will keep at 7, so that banks will foreign investment will come to India and it will invest in India. Now, when the US Fed rate cut happens, what will happen is that now this will become 5%. So, automatically ours will become 6%. So, this will help India in a way, still it is higher than Fed. So, it is higher than Fed. Why we will keep still higher than Fed? Because in order to attract the foreign investment. So, there will be cheap flow of foreign money. Also, this reduction in Fed rate will help improve Indian economy also in a way that it will reduce the borrowing cost for domestic borrowers. So, there will be uptick in private credit, there will be uptick in investments, and there will be uptick in the overall economy. So, generally RBI reduces its rate of interest or repo in conjunction with the US rate cut, provided the domestic factors like inflation etc. are in control, right. So, just because I discuss US rate cuts will also help bringing money to India, I just want to make you understand the entire logic of how US rate cuts will bring money to India and what is the relation between US Fed and Indian repo rates etc. right. Next, international fleet review. There is another important news item, and the amount of questions coming from defense is gradually increasing. So, it is important to have an idea about this. See, traditionally it has been a norm or a practice of a country to gather all its naval ships etc. to do some sort of naval exercises and to do some sort of capacity showing exercises in order in war times, in order to show off their strength and also scare the adversaries. That has been a traditional way. Now, in the modern era of diplomacy and maritime security etc., what we are doing is that this naval exercises or fleet review exercises are helping to build diplomacy and connections. Now, before we enter into all these things, we will understand what is fleet review. Basically, fleet review is nothing but gathering of naval ships of the host country and navies of the foreign friendly countries at a place, and it will be inspected by the host country's head of the state. That is it. It is basically an exercise to invite the navies of all the friendly countries and to build diplomacy etc. right. This is naval fleet review. Now, the current naval fleet review is third international fleet review, right. Anyone who is reading the newspaper, there is a small issue there. The spokesperson for the Navy says that before naval international review happened in 2001 coinciding with 50 years, and this is the second one. Actually, there is one that happened in 2016 also. So, the one happened in 2016 is the second international fleet review, and the one that is happening now in 2025 is the third naval fleet review, and this is in 2026, and this is will coincide with the 75th year of Indian Republic. Right, it is happening at Visakhapatnam. Right. First event, as I discussed, happened in 2001, and the current theme for this is united through oceans and bridges of friendship. The theme is united through oceans and bridges of friendship. Please remember this, all of these are important from prelims perspective. A statement can be the 2026 Naval Fleet Review is a second such review. There are PYQs that have come in this fashion. You might think it's very factual, they will not ask this, but there are PYQs that came in this fashion. I think it is about India Africa Forum Summit and also 2008 Naval Symposium, etc. They ask it is second, it is third, something like that. So remember this. Now the next part is, what are we going to achieve through this? Naval diplomacy, right, and also it will showcase India's expanding maritime role in Indo-Pacific and increasing multilateral naval engagement amid regional competition, particularly with China. Now before that, we will also see what is happening with India's current naval outreach. India is donating ships and naval platforms. Example, we have donated some corvettes to Vietnam, providing interceptor craft to Mozambique, commissioning maritime rescue coordination center Sri Lanka, and we also having a Sagar Bandhu operation in Sri Lanka right now to help them during cyclones, etc. And this HADR, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operations all across the Indian Ocean region. These are some of the major initiatives that we are doing, and apart from that, India also approximately participates in 20 bilateral exercises and almost some of the major multilateral exercises like Malabar, Milan, Konkan, Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. It is a platform for maritime cooperation and all these things, right. And our Sagar initiative has also expanded from Sagar to Mahasagar, in the sense that under Sagar we are focusing on IOR region. Under Mahasagar we are not just focusing on IOR region, we have extended this to African, Latin American countries also, right. So security and prosperity for the extended neighborhood and also beyond. So Mahasagar initiative. So these are some of the naval or maritime diplomatic initiatives that India is doing. This can be a very important point for the prelims perspective, right, especially these exercises and all. Samudrayaan, another topic, right. It is in news because there is a delay in some testing happening in Samudrayaan because a type of foam, right, that has to come from France was not delivered, and without that synthetic foam, this type of foam called as synthetic foam, right, without that foam we cannot do the submersion trials, and hence the submersion trials that are supposed to happen at the end of this year will now probably happen at mid of next year. Now what is Samudrayaan? See, Samudrayaan is basically India's first manned ocean mission with a budget of approximately 4,000 crore, right. What will happen is that approximately 3 persons will in a submersive vessel called as Matsya. Called as Matsya, 3 persons will go to the depth of 6,000 meters for ocean exploration, rock relief and sample collection, ocean studies, and also for polymetallic nodules and other high sea mineral exploration activities, right. It is being done by Ministry of Earth Sciences. And now coming to Matsya, or before we come to Matsya, now we have discussed something called as synthetic foam. Basically this synthetic foam is nothing but a foam that is made of microscopic hollow glass as well as some sort of resin material which will cover this Matsya vehicle, so that even at that 6,000 meters depth there will be some sort of buoyancy, right. So this foam is designed by France. The testing for this will happen in Norway and then it will come to India. So there is a delay in this process, hence the trials have been put off. Now once we successfully achieve our objective of going to 6,000 meters, India will be one among the handful companies of countries like US, Russia, Japan, France and China. Only 5 countries so far has went up to this depth, and India will be the 6th country if once we successfully do that, right. Now the Gaganyaan, this Matsya vehicle for this entire process is being built by ISRO, right. This vessel will be made of titanium. The current vessel that we are using for the trials is made of steel, and the actual vessel which will be using when we are diving at 6000 meters will be made of titanium. As of now we have finished the trials of submersion at 100 meters, and once the synthetic foam comes, 500 meter submersion trials will also be done, and once this is done, the actual testing of this Matsya vehicle and its ability to withhold the pressure at that distance of 6000 meters, depth of 6000 meters etc. will be done in Russia, right. This is about Samudrayaan. The next important topic here is mostly important from science and technology perspective, is about how Nvidia and Google AI chip rivalry could unfold. So what is happening is that Nvidia has been the global leader in something called as GPUs, graphics processing units, right, and this GPUs or what is being used by most of these AI companies for their generative AI purposes, either it is OpenAI or it is Meta or it is Gork, whatever it is. These are the GPUs just these people are using for the computational abilities in generational AI, and Nvidia has almost monopolized this market with 70% market share. Now recently Google has come up with something called as TPUs, tensor processing units, right, and now this article is discussing about what is happening and what are the different kind of chips etc. See, before we go into this, first let us understand something. CPUs are the basic necessity things, central processing units. These are the basic necessary things for a computer which will do a lot of generalized tasks. At some point of time, Intel and AMD are the two companies, mostly Intel and to a smaller percent AMD, are the two companies which has achieved success in building these CPUs. And at that point of time, GPUs were not very prominent, and Nvidia was a leader in that. And Nvidia used to advertise with this GPUs as an additional chip-in or plug-in components to provide some additional computational support that is required for say gaming or animation etc. Right, that is used to be the role of GPUs. Now with the advent of AI and especially generative AI and training of large language models etc., GPUs are no longer optional plug-in components to provide additional computation power, but mandatory components. For example, right now every CPU which is working on this generative AI is using 6 GPUs. So from being something that is a optional thing, GPUs has become completely dependent or completely mandatory thing because of the advent of AI, and Nvidia was dominating this field. Now Google has come up with TPUs. So what is the difference between GPUs and TPUs? Now let us see this. Right. See, CPU, GPU, TPU all are essentially processors, but with each and everything is a completely specialized. For example, CPU are for general purposes like I told you before, GPUs for accelerated computing solutions like I said for gaming, animation etc. Now there is something called as application specific integrated circuits, ASICs, application specific integrated circuits. Now what are this? These are integrated circuits designed for a single specific purpose, right. Now Google TPU is an ASICS, in the sense Google's tensor processing units are specifically designed from ground up to run only AI based events, or it is good to handle neural networks. That is the difference. GPU will provide an additional computational support, that is it. It is not application specific, it will provide more support, like if you play Need for Speed game and all, like that nitrous boost we give, just press the button, the car will go a little bit faster. GPUs are basically for that, it will provide additional computational support, whereas TPUs are designed for only specific purpose, and that specific purpose is AI based computational tasks and working on neural networks. So that is why Google says TPUs are more advanced than GPUs and betting on this, and that is the reason why yesterday there were fall of 3% stocks of Nvidia. So the entire discussion is because of this. Here you need to understand this component, that is it. Okay. And next news article is about Aravalli. So what is happening with Aravalli? Recently Supreme Court in a judgment has accepted a government, a Ministry of Environment proposal that any mountain that is having an elevation of above 100 meters, only they will be considered as Aravallis, right. Any mountain that is having a elevation of about 100 meters or more should be considered as Aravallis, and anything less than that is not considered Aravallis. Now this is the main point of this entire article. Now what is the contention here? The thing is, Aravallis are some of the most oldest mountains on the planet. Right? Aravallis are some of the most oldest mountains on the planet, and Aravallis perform exceptionally varied functions. They are considered as lungs of North India. The entire Aravalli ecosystem, Rajasthan, Haryana, Delhi, all these areas it covers, and it is considered as lungs of North India. Aravallis are barriers against the expansion of Thar desert, modulates the hot winds especially in Indo-Gangetic plains. So the ecological importance of Aravallis cannot be more stressed, because Aravallis are ecologically extremely significant, running for almost 700 kilometers. They perform a varied functions and they are extremely ecologically important for entire Indo-Gangetic plains. Now Aravallis are also rich in mineral deposits, and the classic environmental growth versus development versus environment, or growth versus environment debate is happening right now. So what is happening is that in a recent Supreme Court judgment, Aravallis are group of mountain chains, and since they are one of the oldest mountain chains, they are heavily eroded mountain chains also. So this panel says that any mountain range that is elevated above 100 meters or above, only they are considered as Aravalli protected Aravalli mountain ranges, and rest of them can be declassified from protected area status and mining can happen. This is the entire point of contention here. Despite of being ecologically significant, the report of ministry going against its own Aravalli development plan, which it released in 2024, saying that entire Aravalli chain has to be treated as an ecosystem, and we cannot selectively protect and not protect different parts of Aravalli. We have to treat entire Aravalli as an ecosystem. That is the proposal set by the government itself in its Aravalli protection plan of 2025, released in this year May. So now few months back it is going against its own report, and also the survey done by FRI, Forest Research Institute, and now it is saying anything only above 100 meters can be protected and everything else is unprotected and can be declassified, and we can do mining and other sort of activities in this areas, right. and Supreme Court has accepted this judgment. Again, this is also against Supreme Court's previous judgments, where in 2002 Supreme Court itself says Aravallis is a single integrated ecosystem. In 2018 Supreme Court has observed that without Aravalli, hillocks winds would bring down massive pollution to Delhi, but this new panel recommendation and the acceptance of Supreme Court of this panel recommendation goes against the previous Supreme Court judgments itself. This is another concerning topic, and the table that is given here, especially this table, is something. Please take a look at this table. It is going to be extremely important from your prelims perspective. So, Central Pollution Control Board reports recently says that there is an extreme heavy metal contamination in Delhi, and uranium contamination in Delhi stands at 3rd spot in India. Right? Delhi stands at 3rd spot across India in uranium contamination, next to only Rajasthan and Haryana. Right? Apart from that, Delhi also has highest levels of heavy metal contamination like chromium, nickel, fluorine, etc. according to this report. Now, the report also says one of the reasons why there is extreme uranium contamination in Delhi is because of the groundwater levels or the aquifers of groundwater in Delhi are at extreme depth or at very extreme depth. So, in order to tap these aquifers of extreme depth, we have to dig deeper, where also we will find uranium, and that is why uranium is getting mixed into Delhi groundwater. So, this is what the report is saying to us. Now, the another concern is the high fluoride concentration. The report says that the high fluoride concentration here is basically because of geogenic factors. That is, it is because not because of anthropogenic factors, but because of geogenic factors. That means naturally occurring water rock interactions. So, this is what bringing fluorine into the groundwater. And another cause of concern is electrical conductivity measured by total dissolved solids. So, electrical conductivity measured by total dissolved solids is also very high in Delhi, and apart from that, it also, the report also says that alkali hazards and sodium measured by sodium absorption ratio and residual sodium carbonate ratio, both of these are also at very high. The normal sodium absorption ratio across the country is 26%, whereas in Delhi the number is approximately 178. These two factors, alkaline residues measured through sodium absorption ratio as well as residual sodium carbonate, is a measure of how suitable the water is for irrigation, and this high level makes Delhi underground water absolutely unsuitable for irrigation. So, what are the reasons for this Delhi pollution? The first thing is obviously industrial discharge, leaching from landfills. We have this open landfills in Ghazipur and Balswa, and next over extraction of groundwater, right, geogenic processes, agricultural runoff, and also improper sewage disposal practices. These are some of the reasons why we are facing groundwater pollution in Delhi. Now, take a look at this table, right. This table is extremely important from your prelims perspective. See what are the pollutants and what are the kind of diseases they cause. It can be a match following kind of thing or even a multi-statement kind of question. The next topic is UN Secretary General, and here we are going to discuss how the next Secretary General for UN is going to be elected, right. The current term of the current Secretary General is about to be finished in 2026, and there should be a new Secretary General by 2027. Now, we will understand the process for this. The beginning of the process is that the 15-member UNSC, the UN Security Council, along with the President of 193-member United States General Assembly, will officially invite the nominations for this post, and only a member country can nominate a person for this. Now, after the nomination has been done, after the nominations has been received, what will happen is that the United Nations Security Council, a 15-member council, will vote on this. This process will do a secret voting on this, and this process is called as straw polls, right. What will happen is that each member of this Security Council will given 3 options: encourage, discourage and no opinion, and they will keep on voting until there emerges a consensus or unanimous candidate. There emerges a consensus or unanimous candidate. Now what will happen here is that in this process of United Security voting in UNSC, no candidate should get a veto from P5, that is US, UK, China, France and Russia, right. US, UK, Russia, China and France. So no candidate should get a veto from P5, and apart from that 9 out of 15 members should vote for that candidate. Once this happens, the candidate clears the hurdle of UNSC. Alright. Once the candidate clears the hurdle of UNSC, that UNSC recommendation will be sent to UNGA, and now normally UNGA approval in this entire process is like a rubber stamp. Whoever the candidate the UNSC approves, UNGA will generally formalize that and the person is elected. This entire process is generally, traditionally is done on a rotational system, that is conventionally it is by rotation, region by region, right. In 2016 when the term ended, in 2021 when the current General Secretary's term ended, it should be Latin America, but this current General Secretary from Europe is re-elected. So now the turn will mostly be of Latin America. Right. And UN General Secretary is normally elected for a term of 5 years, and he can be elected one more time, that is it, right. He cannot be elected for more than once, and a term is of 5 years. So this is the process of election of UN General Secretary, right. 15-member security panel will vote called as straw polls, where they will have 3 options: encourage, discourage and no opinion, and no candidate should get a veto from P5, and also they should get 9 out of 15 votes. Once that resolution is passed by UNSC, the resolution is sent to UNGA, and UNGA will formalize the appointment process. The last topic for prelims today is UNESCO World Heritage Site status for Sirpur. Sirpur is an extremely important medieval archaeological site in Chhattisgarh. It is an extremely important medieval archaeological site by Chhattisgarh. Why this site is important is that it is a multi-religious archaeological city where there is evidence of Hindu, Buddhist, Jain monuments, and even among Hindu, Shaivism plus Vaishnavism. Both religious philosophies, monuments are found here, temples are also found here, apart from lot of Buddhist viharas as well as Jain viharas and Buddhist monasteries. And the next part is, it is also on the banks of river Mahanadi, and the entire riverine landscape is considered very sacred. And Sirpur is also a place of natural plus human combination ecosystem, the kind of sites which UNESCO grants natural heritage status to, right. This Sirpur is a multi-religious urban center first discovered by Alexander Cunningham in 1882, and this is the person who went on to become the first Director General of Archaeological Survey. This is a unique multi-religious site showing Buddhism, Jainism, Shaivism and Vaishnavism things, monuments etc. Right. The next thing is, Sripuram is a flourishing capital of Dakshina Kosala kingdom under Panduvamshi and Somavamshi kings, right. It is a flourishing capital of Dakshina Kosala kingdom under Panduvamshi and Somavamshi kings in the medieval India. Right. Now what are the kind of preparations that the government is doing in order to ensure the site gets this natural heritage status? First, they are doing a detailed mapping. They are also doing fresh excavations to uncover any additional structures, and they are also creating buffer area to protect the site from encroachments, Mahanadi flooding and agricultural expansion, and also preparing tourism infrastructure and all these things, and heavily focusing on ecotourism related aspects, right. So, what is a criteria for nomination? The criteria is, the first, the site has to be on India's tentative list, right. Then it should satisfy at least one of the 10 criteria for outstanding universal value, OUV. It should have a strong conservation, management and as well as protection plans, and then it will be evaluated by International Council on Monuments and Sites and World Heritage Committee. Currently, Sirpur site is being prepared to satisfy the outstanding universal value criteria.